Hi. I'm continuing after our previous discussion of the 5th century BC in Greece. At the end of the 5th century, that is, at the end of the 400s BCE, Athens fell, and this really was the end of the city-state, the polis. The 4th century BC, 3rd and 2nd, are usually labeled Hellenism. That's Hellenism. The reason for this is that it marked the spreading of Greek culture and Greek influence. Now, in the first half of the 4th century, we have the era is dominated by Plato for us. I'm not going to discuss Plato, although his influence and his achievement are vast. Dominating the second half, or at least a period of the second half, is Aristotle. I'm not going to discuss him either. We'll discuss them some other time, perhaps. But what happens historically is that in Macedonia maybe, in northern Greece, a powerful kingdom grows, especially under the leadership of Philip of Macedon or Macedonia. He was an ambitious man, a great man really. It was his ambition to unite Greece. And this was a noble ambition because, in a sense, since the Greeks had never successfully united, their political influence was always a little bit compromised. That is, not complete, because to talk about Greeks was to talk about Athens or Sparta or Corinth or some of the other states. By the way, a parenthetical observation, parentheses. A parenthetical observation. People who talk about or refer to the Greeks and make generalizations by the Greeks are on dangerous, if not very careless and sloppy grounds. After all, mostly they are referring to the period from, say, Homer, 750 BC, to the Christian era, or even after that, including Hellenism. Well, this is a vast period, as much as 1,000 years. To make generalizations about 1,000 years of any history is untenable. It can't be done. Besides that, most of the time when people talk about the Greeks, they're talking about the Athenians, Athens. And most of the time they're even talking about the Athenians, they're talking about that 5th century BC, which we discussed previously. And really, it's even difficult to make generalizations about that 5th century. So to say that the Greeks were thus or thus, that the Greeks were analytical and not romantic, that the Greeks were philosophical and not religious, that the Greeks had a positive attitude toward life, enjoyed life, especially sensuality, the senses, that the Greeks loved the human body and our physical existence and glorified our appetites and so forth, is nonsense. It can't be said. So beware of all generalizations about the Greeks. That's the big point. End of parentheses. Back to Hellenism. So Philip of Macedon had as his ambition to unify Greece at last, so that Greek political influence could somehow reflect or be worthy of Greece's cultural influence, which was huge, vast. And that was, in a way, a noble aspiration, goal. He succeeded in uniting the northern Greeks. I don't remember exactly how or what, but I remember a date 346 that was important to him. But around that, let's see now, 323. His son is Alexander the Great. Alexander lived to be about 33. So 323, 356. Alexander was born in 356 BCE. For a while he had as his tutor Aristotle. Aristotle was then a young man, but the relationship between the two was apparently pretty close, because after Alexander started to make his conquests in Persia maybe, he sent back to Aristotle various biological specimens for Aristotle's biological studies, and Aristotle was maybe above all a biologist. Certainly a biologist. Biology was the great science that he was so interested in, along with, of course, philosophy. Okay, but so that's an interesting relationship and pretty important, after all. Aristotle and Alexander the Great. Wow. Anyway, Alexander, when still a young man, 16, I think, seem to remember, 340 maybe. Anyway, while still a young man, Alexander succeeded in unifying Greece just as his father had hoped. And this meant, of course, taking over Athens too. Well, some Athenians admired him, and some, of course, didn't like this. But mostly they admired his goal of Greek hegemony, Hegemony, which means general domination, just as one can speak in the modern world of American cultural, economic hegemony. Another parenthesis. This Hellenism that we're discussing today has very strong parallels to this Hellenism, which is the spread of Greek culture, Greek influence, is paralleled remarkably with the Americanization, let's say, of the world. The parallels are very interesting, and they go deeper than just superficial things. And I'll discuss that a little later if time permits. Okay. So Alexander united Greece. And then he decided that he wanted to pursue the Persian Empire. His aim was really world domination, I guess you could say. An amazing man, amazingly ambitious, great energy, of course, great vision, great intelligence, it would seem, great military leadership, inspiring to his followers, including some very sharp generals, in a very similar way to Napoleon, I think. Great leader who inspired great leaders too. And they, of course, were ambitious too. Okay, in 333, he began his, in 336, he began to invade the Persian Empire. Now, the Persian Empire was huge. By that time, it was 200 years old. Not bad as the world goes. Most empires don't last that long. Excuse me. But it was overextended, like most large empires. Communication was too difficult. So it began to disintegrate, fall apart. The administrative system was not very effective. The Romans were much better at this kind of thing a little later. Okay, so Alexander attacked, and in 333 he won a famous battle. Forget the name. And within about 3 more years, he had conquered the Persian Empire. By 323, before 323, he had gone all the way to the Indus River, which is in modern-day Pakistan, and he wanted to go beyond. He wanted to go to the subcontinent, which is the name for India. But by then his soldiers were weary, and they refused. They refused to go any further. The best of his soldiers were Macedonians still, so this was a Macedonian, northern Greek army. And they said no. So he went back to Babylon, in modern-day Iraq, and there in 323, at the age of 33, he died, apparently of some fever. There are stories, I know one story is that as he was dying, he crawled out of his tent, wanting to drown himself in the river, the Tigris, I guess, river there, in hopes of generating a myth about his, here's a word for you, apotheosis. What a word. A-P-O-T-H-E-O-S-I-S. Apotheosis is a word which means being raised up to heaven to become a god. So, what a man, what a man. Silly and yet interesting. He wanted his body to disappear so that a myth or a legend would grow about his disappearance. And the myth would be, of course, that he became a god. Instead, his body was found along the river while he was still alive, and he died in his tent. Curious, okay. At his death, this is 323 BCE, very important date. At his death, his huge empire, which extended almost to India, from India to Greece, to northern Greece, included Egypt. His huge empire was divided into 3 parts among 3 of his top generals. A general named Ptolemy, Ptolemy, inherited Egypt and maybe Palestine, North Africa along there too. A general named Seleucus, Seleucus, inherited the region that we would call Syria, Turkey, I guess. I'm not sure of this, but huge all the way to the east. And then the third general inherited the Greek world. I'm not sure what else. I'm not sure of details there. It doesn't matter, though. Because of this division, though, these divisions lasted for until the Romans came along, almost 200 years. And it was because of Alexander's conquests and the division of his empire among these Greek generals that Hellenism became so important. Because this meant that each of these regions, each of these empires really, was ruled by a Greek. And each of these Greeks established a dynasty. And these dynasties then were Greek-speaking, Greek-thinking, Greek-educated. And so we have this phenomenon called Hellenism. Now we must remember that even before Alexander, Greek influence had spread around the Mediterranean. Educated people knew about the Greeks. The Greeks were very impressive people. So educated people knew about the Greeks before Alexander came along, knew about Plato. Plato was a very famous man, even before Alexander. But still, and the other Greeks, especially of the 5th century BC, whom we mentioned before, these were known to educated people around the Eastern Mediterranean. And there were Greek colonies scattered around the eastern Mediterranean, as well as in Sicily. Okay. But then when the Greek conquests had taken place, this influence became perpetuated and went deeper and deeper. Now, what is meant by Hellenism? The spread and influence of Greek culture. What is meant by Greek culture? Well, number one, I suppose, Greek language. Number two, Greek philosophy. Number three, Greek, let's call it Greek rationalism. That is, the view of the universe as rational and of man as capable of understanding to some degree that rational universe, exploring it scientifically and so forth. That's what was meant by Greek philosophy and Greek rationalism in general. And number three, let's say Greek religion. Now, Greek religion, what do we have here? Traditionally, we have the Greek pantheon, Pantheon, the Greek pantheon, which had rationalized 12 gods, consisted of 12 gods. The head, Zeus. In quick order, I'll give you a way to memorize these, which I give students sometimes. I think it works pretty well. This is a mnemonic device, M-N-E-M-O-N-I-C. Mnemonic meaning aid to the memory. I divide these 12. There were many Greek gods, but when the Greeks decided to rationalize their religion, they decided they wanted 12 gods, much as the Hebrews and Israelites had 12 tribes, and so forth and so on. 12, a kind of magic number. Okay. 3 times 4, by the way. Okay. Zeus, the first group, 3 brothers. Zeus, Poseidon, Hades. They're the 3 brothers. Poseidon, the sea, earthquakes. Hades, the god of the underground. These are the 3 brothers. Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades. Then 3 sisters. Hera, wife and sister of Zeus, by the way. Goddess of marriage and childbirth. Demeter, or Demeter, goddess of crops and grains and fruits of the earth. Notice that both of these are fertility goddesses. Zeus is a sky god, therefore a god of rain, therefore a god of fertility also. Male fertility rains on female fertility, producing fruit, reproduction. The third sister, Hestia. Hestia doesn't really belong in this group because there are no myths about her. She's the goddess of the hearth, Hearth, or fireplace. As such, though, she's the goddess of the family. The center of the family was the fireplace. Warmth, cooking, the center of the community even. Warmth, the fire was key. Then, the next 8, we've done 3 brothers, 3 sisters. The next 8 are all children of Zeus by various goddesses. I'll discuss that for a second, because people don't quite understand that, I think. All of these myths that depict Zeus running around after mortal women or nymphs or other goddesses seem to suggest that Zeus was a frivolous, if not immoral, god. And he's the head of the gods. What is this? Were the Greeks such silly people? No. I think the best way to understand this is that when the Greeks collected all of their myths together in the 5th and 4th centuries BCE, they found many, many myths about the sky god, Zeus, seducing or marrying even these fertility goddesses. Why? Because the Greeks were scattered, and each of the communities had their own myths about the mountain god, the conqueror, conquering the agricultural goddess. And when they collected all these myths together, here was this one sky god, Zeus, having relations with all these many goddesses. So I think the origins of all of these myths are pretty innocent. And one can forget a lot of these myths. They were silly, and serious people didn't take them seriously, I think. Okay, now the 8 children. Group of 5 A's. That is, 5 of these children of Zeus have names that begin with A. So 3 brothers, 3 sisters, 5 A's. This is easy. Apollo, god of light, basically, not the sun. Light, reason maybe, though that's later. Music, poetry, prophecy, ye'en, prophecy, archery. Very strange collection of things there, suggesting that Apollo, like other gods, was a composite god. That is, he was the result of many myths collected, made into one god, with these various, very various attributes. Second, Artemis, his sister, basically small animals and hunting, also associated with the moon, though. Third, Athena, goddess of war, number 1, but intelligent warfare, thinking, strategy, intelligence, as well as many handcrafts of women. Ares, number 4, god of unintelligent warfare, just hitting, violence, not thinking. Athena always gets the better of Ares. Number 5, Aphrodite, goddess, I think, of feminine beauty and desire. It won't do to say goddess of love. Love, after all, in English is a very general and obscure word with various meanings. Goddess of feminine beauty and desire, maybe. Another fertility goddess, after all. So there are the 5 A's. Then 2 H's. Hephaistos, the most difficult name, Hephaistos, god of metal, Metal. And Hermes, god of many things. I would say communication. But if you think about it, communication, what does it mean? It means roads, travelers on those roads, merchants traveling on those roads, thieves where the merchants are, thieves, cleverness, inventiveness, and thus we arrive at Hermes, a god of cleverness or inventiveness. So 2 H's and the final one D, Dionysus. God, I think, of inspiration, not of wine. Wine is part of it. Wine, not only inspiration, but also wine, the consoler, consoles us in our pain, in our weariness, in our frustration in life, maybe. But also religious, I would say, religious passion. Dionysus is the god of religious passion. And third, he's the god of tragedy, Greek tragedy. The Athenian tragedies were sacred to Dionysus. That's quite a collection. Okay, now, our topic here, that only took 5 minutes. Our topic, once again, is Hellenism. And I said that one aspect of the spread of Hellenism is the spread of Greek religion. But Greek religion had problems. And the best Greeks had trouble taking Greek religion seriously. Plato presents Socrates, I think maybe I said this yesterday, or in the previous lecture. Plato tries very hard to present Socrates as a sincerely religious, in the conventional sense of the word, man. Of course, he can't take seriously the myth about Zeus running around after women, indiscriminately almost. And he can't take a lot of the myths seriously because, frankly, the myths are not serious. A lot of them are silly, and many of them present the gods, frankly, as kind of monsters. So the attitude of a Socrates toward conventional religion, of course, is a problem. But I know Plato pretty well. I personally dismiss all thought that Socrates was a literal believer in the traditional Athenian religion. I suspect Socrates was a monotheist behind it all, that is, worshipped some larger principle, a philosophical principle. And really, is that religious? Not really. Some philosophical principle, like, for example, in the Republic, the idea of the good. So Socrates, but that's not Socrates either. Excuse me, I take that back. I better save this for the Plato lecture, because we get into many problems about what are the differences between what Socrates thought and what Plato thought, and how do we distinguish between these two. So I think no one is sure of what Socrates thought about religion. I'm pretty sure about what Plato thought, but no one knows what Socrates thought, and maybe Plato didn't know himself. So, getting back to my point here, my main point is that serious Greeks, and there were so many of them, could not take traditional Greek religion seriously. This pantheon of the 12 gods and all that, impossible to take seriously. And it was one of the flaws of Hellenism. In the end, a Christian will want to believe that the combination of Hellenization of the Mediterranean world, especially the Eastern Mediterranean, Hellenization gave that area the Greek language, the koine, which was the common Greek dialect, the language of the New Testament. Okay, this was a blessing, because this meant that everyone in the whole Mediterranean, all the way to Rome, knew Greek, and so communication about the Christian message was easy. Without this, the New Testament Christianity could not have spread so quickly and so easily at all. A Christian will also believe that the unsatisfactory nature of Greek religion contributed to the rise of Christianity too. That is, serious people could not worship the Greek gods. They couldn't do it in Homer's time. They certainly couldn't do it in the 1st century BCE. The third element, by the way, to the spread of Christianity would be apocalypticism. That is, that apocalypse, A-P-O-C-A-L-Y-S-E, apocalypticism, that feverish expectation of a Messiah, of God's intervention in the world. This is the third big element in the preparation of Christianity. This is a footnote here, but it's relevant, I think, because I'm talking about Greek religion. It was one of the weaknesses of Hellenism, for sure. Okay, so now I think I'll talk a little bit. I better continue politically, then we'll talk about that. Okay, so the spread of these Greek ideas, which meant Greek philosophy, Greek science also, Greek rationalism, Greek language, number one, I said, Greek cultural values, and that meant art. Greek art. Well, one of the triumphs of the Greek genius is its art, for example, in sculpture. Sculpture, which is so visible. A Greek sculpture speaks volumes about the Greek view of life. And in Greek sculpture, we often have these nude bodies, often the nude male, but more and more the nude female. That's another aspect of Hellenism, by the way. More and more appreciation of the female body, of femininity. So the spread of Greek culture meant, of course, the spread of Greek art too. Okay. I had another point, but I lost it here. Okay, spread of Greek art. Greek culture, Greek ideas. Lost it. I'll get it in a minute. So all these things spread. Greek poetry, Greek literature. Got it. Okay. Now, what else happened during the Hellenistic era? The Hellenistic era was remarkable for urbanization, a huge movement of people from the countryside to large cities. This, by the way, would be the fourth element that I would list in the spread, in the Christianization of the Eastern Mediterranean, let's say. Because urbanization, what did it really mean? It meant people leaving their traditional countryside homes, their traditional countryside values and religions, going to the city, where the flow of ideas was fast, where people from all these different races and groups had to communicate with each other and spread ideas. Well, this was key in the spread of Christianity, of course. But this uprooting of people from the countryside, from their little traditional lives in the countryside, to the big city, Rome, Alexandria, Antioch, Corinth, Athens, the big cities. This meant a lot of lonely people searching for something, meaning, because they had lost the values of the countryside, and these could not be replaced by Greek religion. It was impossible. When the Romans came along, the Romans tried to establish emperor worship. But no human being can take seriously emperor worship, just as the North Koreans can't possibly take seriously worship of Kim Il-sung or Kim Jong-il or any of that. No human being can. It takes an act of huge self-deception to even try to believe in it. It's too absurd. The emperors were just too human, as are the rest of us, for deification. That is, to make gods of. It's very difficult to make a god of a man, of a person. Okay, so urbanization, and this was part of Hellenism. This accelerated the spread of ideas, the spread of Greek culture, but it also undermined the religious values of traditional religions in that area. So that while before there were hundreds of religions, the number of religions, became a little bit more simplified, I think. I won't discuss the mystery religions, kind of key. I will just say this, though, the Greek mystery religions, because these were Greek too, and not very rational, romantic, really. The mystery religions provided, above all, the notion of an afterlife, immortality of the soul, deathlessness, which of course became a huge Christian doctrine. Now, Plato had already held it. Those worthy of it would have to be philosophers, though. In the mystery religions, one was initiated into the religion, step by step graduating to levels of understanding, let's say. Mystery religions contributed a lot toward Hellenism, and, by the way, toward Christianity too. Okay, now I'd like to discuss a little bit the parallel between Hellenism and Americanism, or the better words would be Hellenization and Americanization. Very interesting, though all historical parallels can only be carried up to a point. After that, of course, they collapse. But superficially, and more than superficially, the parallels are interesting. Okay. In the case of the spread of Greek culture, of course, this was, although at first it was not by conquest, through Alexander it was by conquest. Now, the spread of Greek ideas and even the Alexandrian conquests took place during the collapse of a Persian empire that no one wanted to see continue. It was kind of like Napoleon's liberation of large parts of Europe. When Napoleon came along, his conquest was welcomed by many who welcomed a liberalizing democratization maybe, of European countries. In the case of Alexander, this Hellenization was welcomed by many elements in the culture. So there were forces within the Persian Empire that welcomed Alexander. Okay. Now, in the case of America, this has not been a military conquest, whatever people might want to say. But the Americanization of the world, okay, how does it happen? And how did it happen with the Greeks? It begins with the upper classes, I think, the educated classes. The educated classes wanted to learn Greek and Greek ideas. The educated classes want to learn English and American, Western ideas. But let's face it, Western means American. Sorry, Europe, Western means American. Even the Europeans are Americanized. Even those who fight it. So it begins with education and ideas, I think. Those ideas can even be, among those ideas can be religion. The spread of Christianity in Korea is an example, but the same thing happens in Japan and some other countries, though not all. How does Americanization, for example, affect the lower classes? Through these cultural things. Clothes, of course. Music, of course. Films, of course. The values and way of looking at life in the films and ideas. Now let's keep two things separate. The lower classes mostly do not learn English. Only the upper educated classes learn English. The lower classes pick up some words, some scattered words, and everybody knows what some of those are in the case of Americanization. In Hellenism or Hellenization, it was similar, and that's what strikes me. It begins with the upper classes learning the language, and then they want to know everything about the culture that comes with the language. They want a Greek education. They want to read Homer, and they want to read Plato. They want Greek tutors, and they want Greek statues in their garden. They want a Greek villa that looks just like Greek habitations and things like that. The lower classes are struck more subtly by not the language, but the other things that come along. Dress styles, a little bit. Music, probably. I don't know how that happened in Hellenization, but I imagine it happened to some degree. Americanization goes much deeper, is much more pervasive, largely because of the ease of communication. In our time, it takes seconds for anything to go from New York or Washington, D.C. or Hollywood to Seoul and Daegu and Gumi and Pohang and the smallest village. Instant ease of communication facilitates, makes easier the spread of all this. I'd like to add a view about this. The spread of Greek ideas during Hellenization was largely a healthy or not unhealthy thing in many areas of the world. After it left, many of these places returned to their old ways pretty easily, but change was permanent in some places, like, for example, Alexandria in northern Egypt, other places, Turkey, other places. It was only the much deeper changes of 6 centuries later of Islam that wiped out a lot, almost totally. But the changes were healthy. Now, what about the Americanization? I'm digressing a little bit, but I think this is probably more interesting to some people than Hellenization. So I think Dr. Shin will agree. In my opinion, it's only my opinion, of course. I'm going to leave aside the question of language for a minute. Other cultural values, I don't know. I'm not sure what American ideas are. It seems to me the most valuable American ideas are probably a pretty deep belief in democracy. Is the democratization of the world a good thing? I think mostly. Critics of democracy will mostly say that it's a bourgeois form of government. That is, it is made for the middle class. It's controlled by the middle class. But the spread of the middle class benefits many people, at least materially. It means more education, more comfort, more leisure, more active pursuit of ideas. And most people think that these are good things. So that, at least in my opinion, the spread of democracy is a good thing. And most people would not deny that, especially if they had to compare the democratic era with some earlier era. Only very conservative, in fact, reactionaries, better look that word up, would want to return to the older forms. So, Americanization brings democracy and general democratic values, constitutional government, representational government, representatives, and all that. Good thing. Dress, music, entertainment, these vary. Some obviously of greater value than others. Let's go to language, because that's the part that worries me. I think I know a lot about the American language and a lot about the English language. And I fear that the American language is such a bastardized form of English. Bastard, illegitimate child. At its best, it's still a bastardized form of English at its best. Now, of course, I'll stick with American, because British English has declined in the 20th century too, under American influence. But what I fear is that the Americanization of the world, first of all, it only happens because of American economical power. American economical power creates this Americanization, that's all. It's not some superiority of the English language. I think there is no superiority of the English language. If anyone says it, it's a total myth. I think from what I can see, the Korean language is superior in serious ways. But because of economics, the American culture spreads. And because of the ease of communication, it spreads fast. It's irresistible. It's all pervasive. It pervades all cultures everywhere. By force? No. No. By economic power and the ability to spread ideas quickly. Not by force. It's pervasive. And what I fear is that the spread of the American language will have a more negative than positive effect. Simply because our American language is too easily vulgarized. It begins on a level of just above vulgarity and slips very easily into sloppy grammar, imprecision, imprecise, not precise language, not very high usages, massive idioms that come and go and aren't very strongly based in reality, in language, I think. Anyway, I'll stop preaching, but I thought I'd share some of those ideas anyway. I'll conclude. I've been talking about Hellenism and Hellenization. Hellenism, Greek culture and its ideas, its language, its values. Hellenization, the spread, mostly by military conquest, of those ideas through a vast area of the world. I discussed parenthetically a couple of things, like the spread of the creation of, by Hellenism, of a world which was ripe for Christianity. I'm not saying Christianity was right or the best religion or anything. I'm just saying it was almost inevitable. Such a religion was almost inevitable in that setting. And that doesn't make it less believable either. You can say that God worked all this and all that. Whatever you think, it doesn't matter on that. I'm just saying that's the way I analyze it. Okay. Then third, I talked about a parallel between Americanism and Hellenism. Americanization and Hellenization, which I hope is interesting to people. How did Hellenism end? It ended with the coming of the Romans. The Romans conquered Greece finally, really, in 143. I think 143, not 146. 143. But this did not mark the end of Hellenism, because the Romans were great admirers of Greek values, Greek culture. They didn't contradict these things at all. They expanded their influence. All the great Romans studied in Greece, actually went to Greece. The ones who couldn't had Greek tutors in Rome or wherever they were, and had had their children learning from Greeks. All this is Hellenism and Hellenization, and the Romans continued that, even encouraged it. When does Hellenism end? I think it ends really with the Christian era. I would push it all the way to 311. In 311 AD, or CE, the Christian era, that's when Constantine the Great, the Roman Emperor, officially said that Christianity was legal to be practiced in the Roman Empire, and that was simply a way of saying that Christianity would become the almost official religion of the Roman Empire. If you accept such a date, then Hellenism lasted almost 700 years. A huge chunk of time, an amazing cultural phenomenon, and one that serious students have to be aware of. Okay.